All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Monday, June 4th meeting of the Rules Committee. We have a quorum, so I'm calling the meeting to order. The first item on our agenda is citizen comment. And in just a moment, I will have the citizen comment sheet. Okay. All right, Carlos Sutton, please. And then Madeline Ducre, Betty Esther, and Ray Friedman.
Good evening. Alderman Nguyen, thank you for this opportunity. Members of the Rules Committee, I have two concerns on your agenda here that I would like to address this evening. The first is number 8, public and council interaction. Lately, when I read the first page of the citizen comment for the minutes, it says there that you can no longer advocate your minutes to someone else. To me personally, I think this is a dampening on citizen participation and the opportunity for people who sometimes send me up here to speak for them because they're afraid to stand in front of you themselves. And I don't want to dampen that opportunity or lessen the effectiveness of citizen participation in these meetings. And I've asked last week for someone for the Rules Committee to contact me, letting me know when this rule was changed, that this law or practice had been addressed, and I haven't heard anything from anyone yet. So that's the first thing. And secondly, the discussion about changing the city clerk's position from one of elected to one of appointed, I'm very, very opposed to that. Mr. Reed received more participation and votes than any other minority candidate citywide in city history. And to take this position and leave it to a few people to decide who will have that position, I think is also dampening citizen participation and not opening up the city for full transparency. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Madeline Ducre.
Good evening, everyone. Madeline Ducre here. I would like to speak about the change that the mayor changed when it comes to speaking. I disagree with the mayor. We do not have enough time as it is to speak. Democracy, people, okay? People need to express themselves. How else are you going to be able to comment on the situations, what is happening in this little town, okay? Unless you just want to be dictating everything what the council people want to do. And I'm looking across here. I don't think, some of you don't, I don't think you feel that way. Some of you, I don't know. Now, my suggestion is let the people talk, express themselves. We need to express ourselves. We do not need a timing change. Transferring it to someone else is not a bad idea. And I'm going to leave it alone for now. I'm going to see what the council says. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Betty Esther?
Good evening.
Good evening.
In coming to Evanston and moving to Evanston out of Chicago, our neighbors to the south, they said that was, well, you move into a diversity, and there was a whole lot of other stuff people said and everything. Got here, the people seemed warm, friendly, came to my first council meeting. People got up and talked and everything and expressed themselves, and that's good. People are being heard. And so we've had seen, in the years I've been here in this town, more people have come out to speak and let you hear what they have said. Are we now going to start with saying that you can't come back we want to be backing that up. I don't think so. If it's a group of people or even an organization and they write something that they feel is crucial that need to be get out, and if 3 or 4 of them sign up, and then they say, well, we want to give our time to that person so that statement can be fully read, there is nothing wrong with that. We
Yes, it's the wire.
No, I'm okay. Nothing is wrong with that.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Ms. Esther.
Wrong with that. Even our group, the Citizen Network of Protection, we have written things out in practice and so, okay, I read to here, then I give you this and you read, and then the next person read. We are cooperating with each other to get a message out so you know what we are thinking. To start changing it, no. To open it up and making it much easier for people to talk, that would be a better thing. We get 45 minutes. The community, the people should be able to speak during those 45 minutes. So if it's not but 2 people here or 1 person here, that person's citizen should have that 45 minutes to speak. That is our time. Let's stop taking our stuff away from us. We see too much of that. And the part about the civility, yes, things be said, people read them back. There was one rule said you don't talk when the citizen is speaking, nobody from the council podium speak. That's fine. When people out here in the audience, you do not talk back at or try to have a conversation with the council. That is a matter of respect. Let's start respecting each other on that. That we need to work on. And I think we should have classes on that, as they say. As Emily Post would say, let's do it the proper way. And number 12, the referendum ballot to change the city clerk to appointed position. Since I've been here, I've always voted for the city clerk. That has not been a discussion that we have had in the community that do you want to change this ballot? Do you want to get rid of the appointed person? Do you want to go have the elected person go? Do you want to have that appointed? That is a conversation that has not happened. So one question I need to know, if this is going on as a referendum, what type of referendum question is it? Is it an advisory question that you're putting out into the community that's going to be debated, that will be voted on as an advisory question as to whether you can do this? Then you come back like you did with the township and then say, okay, we want to get rid of it. But for you just to arbitrarily make a decision that you want to get rid of somebody that I voted, got up and went to the poll and cast my vote for, I don't think so.
Thank you. Next, we have Ray Friedman, excuse me.
Sorry, I shut the thing off.
You had nothing to do with that, right?
No,
Okay,
no,
all
I
right,
just
sure.
turned off the volume.
Okay.
Good evening. Oh my goodness. Wrong way. It's a drummer. Good evening, City Council. My comments are pretty much the same as the people who were here before me. A little bit different. We were at the affordable housing meeting last Wednesday, and the people who spoke about affordable housing from Highland Park made a big reference to speaking to the residents to get their input. So that's number one, okay? Speaking about affordable housing. The citizen comments here, what I'd like to see is maybe a committee that is formed that you can discuss the citizen comments, the public comments. It seems everybody has their opinion, everybody makes their point, and then everybody goes home, and then what happens to all those comments that the citizens made? And granted, some are good, some are not so good, but if there's some kind of, I don't know, a committee that can discuss the citizen comments, and then we can get some kind of feedback on those comments, that we know that our voices are heard and that some action can be taken, it can be done about what the citizens' concerns are, no matter what they are. That's my comment. Sorry
Thank you.
about the music.
Nope, that's fine. Devon Reed?
I'm here to talk about one item, and it's the financial disclosure forms. I know that there's an item to change our law there. And so one is changing the notarization. By changing the fact that by not having to notarize those forms, we can digitize that service, as the state of Illinois has done, as the Cook County Clerk's Office has done for years. Another part of our law, beyond the notarization of the forms, there are points where it says that the forms must be destroyed every year, and there's another line item that says that certain forms for certain committee members are not eligible to be released. And from my understanding, that does not comport with the 2011 FOIA law. So all forms, if that are collected by the city, would have to be released. So I think that's an update to the ordinance that should also be made. We also have in the ordinance that if someone requests the financial disclosure document of an alderman, that I, as the clerk, must alert that alderman to the name of the person who requested their financial disclosure form. And that seems like a barrier that would prohibit people from looking into the financial interest of their alderman, of people who control a $300 million budget for this city. So it's important that we add transparency and we make sure that this law completely comports with FOIA and with the goals of our city, which is inclusion and making sure that our residents feel the right to inspect what's going on in government. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Now, we're going to move on to, that completes citizen comment. We're going to move on to,
I think it was last day of high school and I got up late and I couldn't sign up.
okay,
Is that
come
right?
forward, please. Yes.
Go ahead, do it before me.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
So, Meg, you walked
I
in
was
before.
here before her.
Okay.
So I would just like to say that I'm disappointed that.
We need to have you state your name.
Okay,
for the-
I'm Meg Welch. I live in the 4th Ward. I am disappointed to see a referendum on whether or not the city clerk should be appointed proposed. With all the controversial and pressing issues in Evanston, there are many things that we could put on a referendum. We could put on a referendum what to do with leftover TIF funds, if there are any, in the 8th Ward. We could put on a referendum, what should we do with the Affordable Housing Fund? We could put on a referendum, do we want a particular city property to be sold? I have not heard an outcry of whether or not the city clerk should be elected. And frankly, I'm surprised anyone would want to be seen proposing something in this era where people are increasingly worried on a national level about concentrations of power. Cities have cities clerks elected officials because they see a need for them to be politically independent. and not, if they're appointed by one person, that makes them not very politically independent. And the city clerk is the official in charge of our elections, the official in charge of our city records. I personally, as a citizen, do not want that kind of power concentrated in one person, and that's what it comes down to if they're appointed. So I'm surprised. I think if anyone votes for this, you're going to be seen as really not encouraging participatory democracy. Please, we don't need this. And also, I'd like to say that, the fact that it's going to be voted on, if it goes to the full council, it'll be voted on the same night as the Harley Clark vote, whether or not the demolition. The cynical part of me, the cynical parts, people would think that's no coincidence and don't think it wasn't noted and that it was brought in, at the last minute, sort of in hushed tones, mumbling at the end of a council meeting. And there's no need for this referendum. Thank you.
Claire Kelly of the First Ward, and I second everything that was said before me. I'm glad to see tonight that you are discussing a lobby ordinance. I think that's a first step and a really important step. I do feel that we really desperately need a lobby ordinance in the city. I think there's a lot of distrust right now, a lot of distrust in the city when we've had major projects going up in the face of outcry against them, whether it's perceived or real conflicts of interest among council members or people coming up to the podium, being a citizen, but actually, on the payroll of a developer. It's important to establish trust for a city, for harmony in a city. So I think a lobby ordinance is an essential way of establishing that trust and also getting at the distrust and trying to ameliorate that situation. So I hope we'll really look at the Chicago one. I hope we'll pass one that's robust so that it will be effective. And I also, both these issues, the lobby ordinance as well as electing our city clerk, both of these are related fundamentally to transparency. So I also feel it's of utmost importance that we elect our city clerk, primarily because he is in charge of FOIA, and FOIA is all we got when we want to have honesty and get information. And if we're relying on somebody, one person, to appoint that person who's going to be in charge of deciding what information will ultimately be released or whether we have to pursue it or take it to the AG's office, that's very problematic. So it really should be somebody that is elected by the people. And, Devon was elected by an incredible margin, elected by a greater margin than anybody here. So I ask that you please don't, and again, I haven't heard any outcry like, oh, we need to have him appointed. Nobody's saying that. So I ask that you please not even, really, I hope that you won't consider putting that on a referendum. So again, I ask you pass a lobby ordinance, really consider a robust one, and keep our city clerk as an elected official. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. That concludes citizen comment. So we're going to move on to item number 3, which is alderman attendance at executive session of a board, commission, or committee meetings.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, good evening. A number of these items have been collected over a period of months, and so we'll do our best to kind of give you a context and then recognize the alderman that had made the request. This number 3 was a request from Alderman Rainey for the Rules Committee to consider, and I guess I would ask Alderman Rainey to make any additional comments.
Yes, Alderman Rainey?
Well, I don't know if any boards and commissions other than the Ethics Committee have executive sessions, so I think that was just tacked on by whoever wrote this up. I have been concerned for a long, long time, in fact, in previous terms, about the Ethics Committee going into executive session. And more lately, the executive sessions that the Ethics Committee convenes into had to do with whether or not they should take a complaint. And I questioned Michelle Mason Cup regarding that being a reason to go into executive session. So she read me I don't know if it was state legislation, local code, whatever, about ethics committees going into executive session. And while I didn't quite understand what she was reading, it still didn't make sense to me, and I argued with her, and she said, well, it says that we can do this. I would like to pursue this further, and I know that's not how this reads here, but that's my major concern, that the Ethics Committee, when they receive a complaint from a citizen, or let's say from a staff member or from a member of the council, that they would then go into executive session to decide whether or not that was a valid complaint that the Ethics Committee should take. I think that should be handled in public, not behind closed doors. So at one time, I asked to please be allowed to go into the executive session. As a corporate official of the city of Evanston, I felt that I should be allowed to go into their executive session, and I was told, oh, absolutely not. You may not go into our executive session. And I thought that I should. So this is two prongs. One, that an alderman should be allowed to attend an executive session of the Ethics Committee, and two, that the Ethics Committee should not be, that we should find out what the basis of that is. What is so private about determining whether or not a public statement that is presented to them, we all know what the charge is, and then they go in to decide whether or not that charge is a valid charge that they should consider. So it's not that the charge is secret. We all know what it is. For example, Anne Rainey violated this situation, and therefore it's being presented to the Ethics Committee. So then they go in private and decide whether or not that's something they should consider. That just makes no sense to me. So that's what I would like us to figure out.
All right.
Does anybody have any insight? Maybe Mario can
Here.
help us out.
First, who would like to speak? Alderman Fisk, and then Alderman Wilson, or Mario, would you like to go first?
I can let the Alderman speak first.
Well, why don't you, is your mic on?
Yeah, this is on.
Thank you.
Hi, Mario Tretto, Assistant City Attorney. With respect to the presence of aldermen or alderwomen in executive sessions for any of the committees, the Board of Ethics, and I think that's what is really at issue here, really needs to be impartial. The influence of an elected official in an executive session really can't be ignored. So the Board of Ethics really needs to be able to be candid in their discussions during the executive session. So it is the law department's position that elected officials not be present during the executive sessions of any of these boards if they aren't voting members.
Okay. Alderman Fisk?
Mario, my question was, aren't there the same rules that we have to follow when we go into executive session?
That is correct. So the Open Meetings Act applies, and the same exemptions would apply to the Board of Ethics.
So in the case that Alderman Rainey just cited, I mean, it doesn't seem to me that that would fall under the exceptions that we normally would be following.
So the board.
I'm sorry. So the representative from the law department is there to advise on what is an appropriate topic for executive session and what isn't? Is that
correct?
Okay.
Why can't that be done publicly?
So that would be a question. So Michelle Mason-Cup is the staff attorney for the Board of Ethics. So there are a lot of exemptions for the Open Meetings Act. Some of them apply to are more applicable to the City Council, and some are more applicable to a Board of Ethics. That's it almost becomes a quasi-adjudicatory body. So that's something that doesn't come before the City Council very frequently. So I'm assuming that is the type of exemption that Michelle would apply with the Board of Ethics.
Well, I think, I'm curious about that too. I think we all are. So I would like to request from the city manager that we get a memo from the law department explaining what the reasons are for the Board of Ethics to go, or what the particular exceptions are for the Open Meetings Act that would permit them to go into executive session as they have in recent months. So I would like to understand that as well.
I'm more than happy to provide a memo at the next meeting.
Okay.
I can do that.
All right, now back to Alderman Wilson and then Alderman Rainey.
Thank you. Yeah, it seems to me that there are it's a pretty limited universe of circumstances where they could go into, or they would go into executive session. So it's not that I have a problem with that. That's provided by state law. As far as the alderman attending, I wouldn't be comfortable with that either. I agree with what our council has suggested. I think if the aldermen were present in that meeting, if you're not on a committee, it would likely have the possibility of having an undue influence or intimidation or whatever. Even just the possibility of going back and reporting to the colleagues. You don't want to create that kind of environment when they're supposed to be having an open and candid conversation. And that's kind of the point of that executive session is to have that conversation.
Yeah.
But you're assuming one of your colleagues is being brought up on ethics. What if you're not? But anyway,
It could be anything. I mean, literally.
The executive session that raised this issue with me was an executive session that took over 1 hour with a room full of audience waiting without any idea of what was going on. I mean, over an hour, an executive session. And the reason they were doing that was to consider whether or not to take the cases. And it's just pretty appalling.
Well, I think that we've asked for a memo, and we'll see that. And I agree with Mr. Trado and Alderman Wilson. I actually don't think that anyone should go into executive session on a board or commission that they're not a member of. And Mario, would you find out? I mean, do we have a rule to that effect? Because how would anyone who is not a member go into executive session and then be expected to adhere to the rules of that executive session? So
Actually, a decision was made previously that an alderman could attend executive sessions, and it was made by the law department.
okay.
I really don't.
Could you repeat that, Alderman Rainey? I couldn't hear you, what you said. Could you repeat that, Alderman Rainey?
I said, in the past, a ruling was made by a previous law department that an alderman could attend an executive session that was not part of the council. I don't want to go to any more meetings of anybody, any executive session. I just raised the issue. The issue I'm concerned about is executive sessions by the Ethics Committee having to do with determining whether or not to take a case. Very specific. That's
Okay.
my very
All right.
specific
Well,
concern.
so we are getting a memo
Are
to
gonna
that
get
effect.
Yes. I agree.
So are you saying that you would like to drop the other issue?
No, I'm not really interested.
Okay. All right.
And Madam Chair, would you like this to come back as a future agenda item at the Rules Committee, or just prepare that off agenda, the memorandum?
I think it would be fine to prepare it just for off agenda to distribute
good.
to the whole council.
Thank you.
So, Mayor, would you like to speak on this issue, or do you feel as though we've resolved it?
It's off the agenda. We don't need to spend on it.
Okay. Alderman Wilson? Okay. All right, fine. All right, so we're going to move on to item. Yes.
Okay.
We have a really long agenda tonight. I just wanted
Yeah,
to
this
say
is
that.
really quick. So I'd like to know what other boards or commissions have closed sessions, because I think there might be some others that do. And if an alderman is appointed to be the aldermanic representative, if they do go into closed session, is that alderman entitled to go in? So.
Well, if they're a member of the committee, they would go into executive session. Right. Okay. Yeah. Mayor?
I'm sorry, along those same lines, then the question that I was going to ask is whether the mayor, who is sort of ex officio, I believe, on all of these different committees, whether he or she also could go into that. So I'm just curious about that from a legal perspective.
Okay. All right. Good question there. Okay, so now item number 4, Transportation and Parking Committee update membership responsibilities. Everyone has received a memo on this. The Transportation and Parking Committee needs to realign its membership in accordance with what the desires are of this council. And so you have a memo regarding decreasing the number of members from 9 to 7, which would help the quorum issues, and decreases the number of members of City Council from 4 to 3, because that's the number of folks who want, members of the council who want to serve on the Transportation and Parking Committee. And we have added, the committee has added additional language to the purpose, which expands the topic of the committee to all modes of transportation, including not just cars, buses, pedestrians, bicycles, everything that's moving in the city at this point. That's what we're trying to do as broadly as possible. And we also are removing non-voting ex officio members. So. All right, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, all right. So similarly, we're going to move to change item number 5 to a change membership for Housing and Community Development Act Committee. Is there any discussion of this?
Move approval.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All right, aye. All right. So that moves forward. Thank you. Item number 6 is a review of City Council Standing Committee process and scheduling of meetings. You have to refresh my memory.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, this was a referral from Alderman Suffredin requesting a discussion of the process that the council currently uses with the standing committees, Administration, Public Works, Planning and Development, meeting twice a month prior to the scheduled council meeting, Human Services meeting on the first Monday, and currently the Rules Committee meeting as needed. Alderman Suffredin, I think that's at least the general.
Yeah, I was just wondering if there's a way we can tighten it up. I don't know if there's, and we could just send the bills list straight to council. I mean, we're all responsible for it anyway. I think a lot of times the redundancy and the amount of discussion on some pretty mundane items keeps us here later than is probably optimal. So I don't know, if we can stack the agenda so that maybe we have a light one and a heavy one, or what can we do to not be here till 11:30 at night on non-controversial meeting nights? Is all I was hoping we could discuss.
Alderman Rainey, and then Mayor Haggerty.
It doesn't seem to me that debate and discussion among council members is what keeps us here late at night. I think we're very efficient in our debate and discussion. Frequently, it is extended presentations that could be done on the third Monday, or that's one thing. And sometimes we have very interesting and controversial issues that take a long time with citizen comment, which is important. But I don't think it's, I wish we had more debate and discussion among the council members. So I don't think that's what keeps us going late at night.
Mayor Haggerty?
So Alderman Suffredin, I share your desire to find efficiencies where we can in terms of the meetings. Having not sat on APW, my question would be with the bills is, every council meeting we're approving, $6 million, $7 million between the payroll and the other bills, and how much conversation goes on about those bills at the committee level.
None. None.
So
Virtually none.
Sorry. Yeah, most of the discussion is, questions about particular items that get raised, we all go over the bills list, and if there's something, the thing that brought this up is we had one where we didn't have a quorum for administration and public works, and we just pushed everything to council, and it worked out fine. I don't know if that would be true every time. We're not discussing, a lot of the routine purchases, like, we're buying road materials and we're approving the purchase, but we're not discussing which chemicals we should be buying for the water plant or anything like that. I think if we had a heavy meeting and a light meeting, I don't know. It seems like if you have a non-controversial meeting where you're here till 11:30, like, you're not doing something right. And is there a way to fix that, or is there, maybe we make the first meeting of the month the one where we do all the proclamations and awards, and we don't do it at other ones? I don't know. I'm not saying that's just if the goal is for us to be as efficient as possible in the public's business, how can we improve on what we do when we have two standing committees that meet prior to council, and we don't have council meeting at a defined designated time, and still provide the oversight and discussion that's expected of us. So if there's a better way, I'm open to listening to it.
Alderman Fleming?
The bills list, usually doesn't take that long, and I guess could be done at council, but I do think that sometimes, and now that I'm the chair, I've noticed this, sometimes we have presentations that I, as the chair, did not know we were having, or Kimberly, as the staff, did not know we were having, and I appreciate the staff's input and the presentations, but for me, particularly if it's a PowerPoint, if it's something that I'm given in advance, even in the packet or it's online, I'd rather read that and then ask a question if I have it, versus have staff sit here and go through a PowerPoint deck that might not even generate any questions, because, that's another 10 minutes that they're going through something that frequently we as the committee members don't even have a question about. And so I'm happy to just have that presentation either in the packet or emailed to me, and then I can be prepared for a question at the meeting versus taking 10 minutes to hear their presentation.
Mm-hmm. Any other lights? Any discussion of, I think Alderman Fleming has a good point.
I guess I have a question because I don't know how we get the city manager. Is there a protocol in terms of determining if staff is given a presentation, like what the topic is, or if it's just if the staff thinks it's kind of a robust topic that they need to give a presentation on?
Alderman Fleming, members of the council, this is a subject that the council has talked about several times in my tenure as city manager, and I think it's the balance between sharing information with the council and the community about key initiatives and not. And certainly we're happy to do less of that. We do less of it than we did at some point. There are discussion topics requested by members of the council at the end of Administration and Public Works and Planning and Development. I think I've seen more of that in the last year or so, 2 years, than I had seen previously. So I think that's a factor, and those are issues that we bring back at the request of a member of the council, usually through call of the wards. We can certainly limit presentations to just questions and then provide them in the packet, provide them online, and we're happy to do that. But I think our challenge sometimes is wanting to make sure that you and the community have as full an understanding of a topic as possible. Again, it's my judgment ultimately working with staff to manage through that, and if we need to manage it more carefully, I'm happy to do that.
Alderman Wilson?
And I think the city manager kind of hit on it, but it is a bit of a balance. You want to provide information to the community. Odd as it seems to me, because I sit here and live through the meetings, I can't imagine going to the gym and watching Channel 16 on the treadmill. But a lot of people do watch these meetings and do watch the committees. So I think it's a useful tool for community members to have a better understanding of some of the things that come up on the agenda. Of course, staff ought to balance, how much information and how much time it's taking. But my perception is that's not really the thing that's taking up time. I think really what takes up time is when there is an item that's controversial. Generally speaking, the committees don't have the same time limitations on public interaction, public discussion. So that's when we end up starting a council meeting at 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock is when those committees are running long. That said, if there's something that's controversial, there's a lot to be said and a lot to be talked about. So it's a challenge, but I'm not sure how to kind of, adjust it. There's some little things that could be done, but I don't know that those are going to have any, notable impact. When we don't have controversial meetings, I do think we are out pretty quickly. So, or I should say controversial items on the agenda. We're usually out pretty quickly.
Yeah. Alderman Fisk?
One of the things that we had talked about from time to time is considering returning to the model that was in place however many years ago, where ANPW and P&D met at the same time in different rooms. Now that would of course mean that the breakdown of aldermen would be 5 to 4 on the committees, and so that was a reason I think that didn't, stay in place. But when both committees were meeting at the same time, the council meetings generally started on time at 8:30. I'm a big believer in the committee meetings. I'm a big believer in giving people their 3 minutes of time to speak at the committee. I would rather have the discussion at committee than at council. I think people feel much more comfortable in a smaller setting. It seems to me that you build a better dialogue between those council members serving and the public when you do have a smaller setting for that. But I don't know even whether that's possible to do with television, whether we would have a room that we could go back and do that. But I would suggest that we think about that, because I think that's one way of really moving the committee schedule along. And just as to let you know how much I believe in that, that's the reason that I agreed not to serve on both ANPW and P&D, so I resigned from ANPW because I really believe in that.
I would say, having been on the council when would those meetings happen simultaneously, and if you had a concern at one issue, at one committee, and you were on the other, we would just cross the hall and sit in on that issue. It did mean that one committee had 4 aldermen and the other had 5. And you're right, Alderman Fisk. That change took place when a new council came in and members of that council wanted to serve on both committees, and then they got stacked. Actually, what happened was they got stacked, and then ANPW moved forward and started earlier. So it started at 6. But
if both committees started at 6 now, we would be certainly ready to go by 8:30 at the latest.
Very much. I think we'd be ready to go earlier than that. Yeah. Alderman Wilson.
Okay, and I get that, but part of my reservation on that is, number one, if there is a member of the community who has something that they're interested in, at both committees, that would be a challenge. But I think more importantly, personally, I'll typically get here before my committee meeting starts, and I'll listen into what is happening at ANPW. So without having to, sit up here and sit up straight. So I can just kind of comfortably watch from, where I'm at. But that enables me to hear the discussion, hear the questions, and hear the things that are answered. So I agree, most of the work gets done at the committee level. But if I weren't a part of that, when I came in for council, I would probably still have all of my concerns and questions. And I think that would extend the council meetings, because then we would be reinventing that wheel to kind of, cover the things that I didn't get to hear and didn't get to. And I know that, for better or for worse, those are on APW and not on planning and development. If you can call it a benefit of, sitting and listening. But I think it's useful because we are hearing what the committee's doing.
Alderman Sufferman?
Sure. Particularly as it relates to administration and public works, is it possible to just have a consent agenda up front? I mean, if you get an agenda that has 22 items on it, and I think we're going to talk about the outdoor cafe thing, but I mean, a lot of these are to come out 5-0, and there's no real discussion or controversy. Maybe if we could knock those off right off the bat, that would make that meeting go. The issue is if the 6 o'clock meeting runs long for just reasons because there's a lot of items on the agenda, no controversy, no discussion, no problem, then everything is backed up. If we start our council meeting at 9 and we get 45 minutes of public comment, we're not into deliberating or discussing anything until 9:45. And then at that point, people, well, given the lateness of the hour, and then that's like time that we could have saved on the front end. And I just wonder if there's a way to do it and still maintain transparency and oversight and all those things on items that aren't controversial, but, just reading the purchase order takes a long time, I mean, can we just put those all on one agreed calendar up front, or is there a better way to do it, is my question. And
I will say, I think that's a good point, because it used to be, we had unlimited citizen comment, like not 45 minutes, but unlimited. And that's when city council meetings started at 11, and the reason why we decided to make it 45 minutes was because people who came, who wanted to speak on their issue, had to go to work the next day, and they left. And none of us were in very good shape to discuss anything at 11 o'clock at night. And, I think that the earlier we can get to the council meeting, the better off we are. Not that we rush certain other issues. I think using the third Monday judiciously has been helpful in a number of ways. I think it would be interesting to find out, is there a way to, Mr. City Manager, to look at that and find efficiencies?
Madam Chair, members of the committee, the use of a consent calendar in other jurisdictions has proved very useful. And there's nothing that says that you couldn't have a consent calendar at the committee level, pull off those items that you felt needed additional discussion, but also then have a regular business agenda. In previous postings that I have had in my career, staff was charged with making a judgment. Is it on consent? Is it on a regular agenda? If staff was wrong, then a member of the council would pull it off of consent for discussion. Otherwise, it was handled as a consent item. So, I mean, that is something that could certainly be tried, even on a pilot basis, because if it didn't work, then the worst that would happen is you pull everything off of a committee consent calendar and you're back to where you were. If it does work, then perhaps you've saved some time. I think, one thing that wasn't mentioned with the previous committees is that structure was that neither of them were televised, it's my understanding.
That's right.
And so it was the council that was elected in 2009 that made the change for all the reasons that have been discussed, but also so that the committee meetings could be televised. And so now we stream them. They're well covered by the press. I think that anyone who's interested in any item on the agenda, on a consent calendar or otherwise, has ample opportunity to receive the information and review it. So perhaps the idea of a consent calendar for the committees might be worth a try.
What is the sense of the Rules Committee? Is there a sense that should be, we should do it?
I think that we should try it, particularly for APNW, since we are doing a lot of routine purchases that we don't have a lot of discussion about.
Okay. All right. Is that the consensus of the Rules Committee, to do a pilot?
Yes.
Right. Okay. All right.
30, 60, 90 days, maybe 90 days?
A 90-day pilot?
90 days, and we will have time to revisit it before. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Would someone like to make a motion to that effect?
Yeah. So I move that are we going to do this for P&D as well? Or should I just speak for APNW?
My recommendation is you should do all the standing committees. So I would even include,
I can't hear you.
I would recommend all the standing committees, and P&D, Human Services.
We only have like one or two items on P&D.
Well, then it could be, but again, not every item. If it's a planned development, my sense is staff would not feel it was appropriate for a consent calendar. If it's something less controversial, then perhaps it might be on a consent calendar. And maybe there would be times that and there's opportunity.
So maybe the motion is that we have an option to use the consent calendar, and instead of that the committee has to use a consent calendar, or is that too confusing for people? I mean, as a chair for
I guess
P&D,
I would ask, since this is the full council serving as the Rules Committee, I guess I'd like some more
clarity.
If you're comfortable with AMPW and P&D only for this 90-day period, I think that makes a lot of sense.
I don't want to speak for P&D because I'm not on P&D.
I'd say let's try it for the 90 days and see how it works. I mean, obviously there are going to be things on P&D that that don't fit into a consent, not as many things fit into a consent agenda as at ANPW.
As APNW.
but-
All right, so I'm making the motion. Did you want to say something, Alderman Fisk?
Yes, Alderman Fisk.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that for P&D, I can't see that happening with planned developments. We certainly can do that with sidewalk cafes and
Yeah, right.
all sorts of things like that. I would certainly want that to be a discussion between staff and the chairman. But I'm happy to try it with the exception of planned developments.
And Madam Chair, perhaps the maker of the motion would agree to move the set beginning time of P&D for this period to 7 o'clock from 7:15? So it would be 7 o'clock or at the conclusion of ANPW?
All right, so let me try to capture all this. So I move that we move to using a consent agenda for a 90-day trial period for all committees of the council.
For ANPW and P&D.
Sorry, okay, for AMPW and P&D. Is that correct?
And that the P&D committee.
Oh, and then P&D committee will move to beginning at 7 p.m. standing time.
And
Always.
planned
Always.
developments are excluded.
And planned development are excluded. All right, should I make that again, or we get it?
No, we got it.
Okay, perfect.
Is there a second? All those in favor, please say aye. Wait. Alderman Rainey, could you talk a little bit more into your mic? It's a little hard to hear you over here.
I haven't started yet.
Oh, I'm sorry.
On a consent agenda, we don't have to exempt planned developments, because on a consent agenda, you just remove the items that you don't want on the consent agenda. Nothing is etched in stone. So if I don't want a fire engine we're going to buy on administration and public works, I just say, please remove the fire engine from the consent agenda. So, that's how a consent agenda works.
Okay.
So.
All right. We have a motion. It's been seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Okay. Next is Rules Committee meeting schedule.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, probably now, I can say a couple of years ago, the Rules Committee decided to change its meeting schedule, so the Rules Committee meets at the call of the chair rather than the previous schedule, which was every first Monday of the month prior to Human Services. So I think the request was to revisit that. Alderman Rainey, I believe, made the request to revisit that current schedule.
I have always felt that the Rules Committee was every bit as important as any other standing committee, and I felt that by making it just a whim of the chair, that it became less important. It's a standing committee, and it's very important, in my opinion. And so I see no reason why it shouldn't be on the first Monday of every month prior to the Human Services Committee, unless there's no agenda. I mean, you just canceled a regular council meeting because there was no agenda, so I don't see why the Rules Committee cannot be standard called for the first Monday of every month, and I would so move.
Any discussion? Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, discussion. Alderman Wilson.
I'd prefer to leave it as it is. I think if pressing matters came up every month, we could have the meeting every month. But I realized we had a number of things that accumulated over a period of time. But if you have it set, then you're scheduling your life, you're planning everything. That's a commitment that you have to make, and it doesn't seem to me that we need to have that every single
As
month
needed,
or even
as
close.
needed. But on the first Monday, as needed.
Well, I mean, it's.
But when do you make the decision that it's...
Yeah, you make the decision the Friday before, the Thursday before, or 2 weeks before. I think this one was planned well in advance, and we were able to kind of compile the things that were going on the agenda, so
How
we could
about
all
every
plan
other
together.
month? Is that fair?
I would just prefer to leave it the way it is. That's my preference.
Alderman Fleming?
I do like an idea of a set meeting. I don't know if it has to be every month, maybe every other month. I just would say if we can make sure that, again, we're efficient so the human services can start at a good time. And then I guess if we don't go, well, I guess the reason for a set meeting for me is so that we don't have a meeting like this where we end up with a lot of things on one night, because this is going to move human services back. And I realize when people come to give comment at any of our meetings, they're going based on what's on our website, which is usually, an hour earlier than we usually get started. So I think if we had it every other month or, at some set time, the chair would know well enough in advance if we had enough items versus having a meeting like this that I know is odd, but that we have a lot of things in one night.
Alderman Rainey, did you modify your motion, or have you kept it the same?
To what? What do you want me to?
To every other month?
That's what I said, every other month.
Oh, you said every other?
I said then every other month. I mean, if you want to do it every third month, I'll do that. I just think it should be a standard set meeting for the Rules Committee, not when the city manager thinks we should have one.
Discussion of every other month. Should we try that one?
And
All right.
there is.
Well, there's a motion on the floor.
There is
It's
a
been
meeting
seconded.
taking place on every first Monday, so it's not like several aldermen aren't already here.
All right. Mayor Haggerty?
I'm all for fixing problems, and I recognize that we've got several items on this agenda tonight. So perhaps shame on us that we didn't hold a meeting perhaps earlier if some of these things were already out there. But I'm okay with the current process of the chair sort of tallying the issues that come up at council meetings that are asked to be placed on the Rules Committee, and then making a decision on when that's going to be. And as a council, we decide when to place that Rules Committee meeting.
Alderman Fisk.
The last thing I'll just add is I want to make sure that that the public feels that the issues that they might have raised and asked an alderman to refer come up relatively quickly. We've got some items here, or a couple of items that came up fairly recently, and some that have been lingering for a while. And that's where I think having it more frequent is better than less frequent.
All right. Okay. So now we have a motion is on the floor. It's been seconded that we hold the Rules Committee meeting every other month. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? No. Okay. So I think we need a roll call.
Okay. Alderman Fisk? Mayor Haggerty? No. Alderman Wilson? Alderman Nguyen?
Aye.
Alderman Simmons?
Aye.
Suffredin?
Yes.
Revelle? No. Rainey?
Aye.
Fleming?
Aye.
6-3. Okay, the motion carries. Okay, so we are now, the Rules Committee will be meeting every other month, so the next meeting of the Rules Committee will be the first Monday in August. Okay, all right. Thank you all. Next item is item 8, public and council interaction, communication, and civility.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, I believe this was Alderman Fisk's reference, and perhaps she'd like to speak to it.
Madam Chair, this was my reference, and it's in related to an email that I asked the city manager to share with the council about improving community relations at council meetings and hopefully at other meetings where we have a dialogue with our citizens. I honestly don't know how to do this, so I'm reaching out to the rest of the council to ask you to think about this. But in the in the email that I sent, there were a couple of, I think ICMA has been dealing with this issue, Wally. We've got an ICMA fellow, do we?
Have a new one in a month.
And I think this would be an excellent project for our new fellow to look at. But basically, it's trying to improve the community conversation. And whether it's at council meetings or at any sort of public meeting, I think there's been an unfortunate conversation that's been going on. I really want us to work to try to improve it. If you look back at the email, it does identify why this is important. At the basis of this is that it discourages people from becoming involved in community government. It discourages people from standing up at the microphone because they may be criticized. It discourages people from running for public office. It, I think, encourages people from simply not being involved. And that's not good for us. That's not good. That's not what we are, and that's never been what we are. But it's happening, I see. And so in the email, it talks about why this matters, and I think it really also drifts down to our staff. As we're going through budget cuts, we're streamlining staff. We want to be able to attract the best staff also. So it's not just elected officials, it's staff and it's the community. So we all have an investment in having a better quality of public discussion. So there are, in the email, and I'm sure, Mr. City Manager, you can come up with more articles for us to look at. One is Maryland is working on civility, nurturing it if you have it, and resurrecting it where it has died. Tips for promoting civility in public meetings, civility at council meetings, 7 rules, get your public meetings back on track, addressing incivility. It just goes on. And I think it's really time for us to devote some time to this. I don't know whether it means we bring in the nice lady from California or what, Jean Bonander, who is wonderful. But we need to rebuild some public trust here. It's not all our fault. It's not all anybody's fault. It's something that we need to pay a little bit more attention to, I think, than we've been doing, because something is definitely not working, and we need to get back on track with it.
Alderman Wilson?
Thanks. And I think some of the explanations are self-evident. You know, you turn on the news or you pick up, your phone to look at social media, and you just see a constant barrage of negativity and hateful messaging. But I've gotten feedback from people who have shown up here to give public comments, and they've been berated and harassed on their way out. You know, followed to the elevators, followed down the stairs, yelled at in the parking lot. You know, these kinds of things are, and we don't see that because we're here and we're not seeing what's going on backstage, so to speak. I've heard talk to people who have become intimidated to actually speak because they're uncomfortable at seeing what's happening to other people as they're leaving. That's not right. Nobody should ever feel uncomfortable to approach us and say what they want to say, particularly from other members of their own community. This is supposed to be a safe space where we have conversations and dialogue. Honestly, I feel we'll disagree a lot. We have things that we don't agree on, and we will have spirited discussions, but I feel like we're not devolving into personal insults and things like that. It's hard, and far and away the vast majority of the speakers who come and talk to us are respectful and are appropriate. But there are those handful who will show up and they will say things that are just simply not true. And it's hard to sit through having a comment that's just simply not true. And it's also hard to sit through comments that I perceive to be bordering on personal attacks about staff members who aren't here. So to your point, Alderman Fisk, you don't want to take a job if you're going to have to, have your your spouse go on the treadmill and watch Channel 16 and see, negative things about your family, particularly if they're not true. And there's an awful lot of not true stuff that's kind of flying around. And it's hard to you can't correct it. If there's a post on social media that gets, reposted 150 times and 2,000 people see it, you can't fix that. So I don't know what the answers are, but I do think that it's become a problem in our community. It's disappointing to me, and honestly, it's surprising to me because I thought Evanston was, different around the time when the recent presidential election, and the superintendent made a beautiful comment about, what Evanston's about and what Evanston's like. I think it would benefit all of us maybe to kind of go back and revisit some of those words and think about how we say things and what we say and whether or not we're promoting conversations or whether we're promoting a hateful narrative that's dividing people. We want to be collaborative, not divisive. And I think if we're collaborative, that's the only way we're going to get things done. So, thanks.
Thank you. Alderman Fisk and Alderman Wilson, I think I think keeping it as a topic front and center and continually talking about it is really important, because when we talk about it, then we reemphasize it, and it brings all of us back to what our common goal is, which is the good of Evanston and a productive dialogue.
I'd like to encourage us to think about asking the city manager to bring Jean Bonender back and do a session with us on this. I think it would be really helpful. I don't know how much it costs. I'm sure it's not very much, but
well, and I'm jumping in, but I don't know that addresses the problem. I don't perceive us getting along in that sense as much of the problem, and it costs money. So that's why I'm jumping in, because I don't want to spend any more money. So,
well, I'm not sure if I could. Let's find out how much money it would cost. I do think it's a starting point, and maybe we can't control everything that's going on in the community, but we certainly can understand it better. And if she has had this experience and can help us, I think that's a good place to start. I think we need to demonstrate that this is something that we take seriously, and we're better people than we're being portrayed to be.
Alderman Fleming and Alderman Rainey, and then Mayor Haggerty.
So I appreciate this, but I could not, or I would not support having Jean, as lovely as she has, come back for this. I guess in my opinion, I feel like we're all adults and we all know how to speak to people respectfully. We all know, we all appreciate being spoken to respectfully. I feel like, in my opinion, some of the issue is that, and I've said this to city manager a lot of times, people are just angry in general about national stuff and also local. I think if people could understand how the meeting works, I know when I have my ward meetings, people say, well, I spoke and no one spoke back to me, and I don't kind of know where my comment went, like Ray said at the podium. I think if people kind of understood that when you speak at the podium, it's not a dialogue. And I always tell people the best way to get their message across is to speak to me first as their elected official. If they come here and say they're 2 minutes, it's not necessarily they're not going to know what happens to it, particularly if something's on the agenda for that night. We're not necessarily going to not move forward because someone came to make a very passionate statement. And so I try to explain to people how city council works and how the committees work beforehand, so that they can be informed and engaged and make their opinion known earlier, so that it's not like the Hail Mary plea at the council where you're not going to get a response. I think that something like, if we could get something very simple on our website, that's why I also feel like having our meetings start at the correct time is helpful, because then if people do want to come make their presentation, they're not leaving here frustrated at 9 o'clock when their issue hasn't even come up. So I don't know necessarily, or I wouldn't support us bringing in, someone to talk to us about this. I think, we all know what we want to accomplish here in being civil. I also think that the public has some responsibility to take in the way that they address us or address anybody else. I've had comments like Alderman Wilson spoke about, where people call me the next day and say they were harassed at their car because they disagreed and made a statement that wasn't popular. So I think that our citizen base has to take some responsibility in this as well. Just because you might be the dominant voice at the meeting doesn't mean you're the only voice, and people should, be able to say what they want at a public discussion. So I don't, I don't know if it's worth making a rule for, if we have some kind of new motto. I don't really like mottos, but maybe it's just really communicating a little better with our citizen base how public comment works, what to expect when you do speak at the podium, where to start if you have a concern, and so on and so forth. So people, by the time they get here, aren't super frustrated.
Okay. Alderman Rainey, then Mayor Haggerty.
I just wonder, though, at some point that the mayor should not step in when we hear our city manager really bullied and abused almost every single council meeting by the same speaker, that he needs to be fired, that a recent hire who is really quite proficient in his work, that he's incompetent. The same things we hear week after week after week that are so inappropriate and so wrong that nobody is able to confront and challenge. And people hearing these things, people who aren't involved begin to believe them. And, we heard some already tonight. And I don't know what you do about it because we're not allowed to respond. And it's, it's just wrong. And I don't like hearing people attacked when it's really so inappropriate, and it keeps happening over and over and over and over. And we can be as civil as you want, but when people keep hearing it over and over and over, they think, oh, we have an incompetent financial person, we have an incompetent city manager, and people are spending money foolishly, and, it just becomes
Mayor
a
Haggard.
mantra that is just wrong.
I'm sorry, Ann. Mayor Haggerty.
Thank you. We have very passionate, very passionate citizens that live in Evanston. You've heard me say this before. We are encouraging people to get engaged and to come forward. I think people get disappointed, and sometimes again their passion runs a bit, and may even get angry when their point of view doesn't prevail. We all know, or you guys all know, generally I don't vote on issues, but in the course of your 4 years on the council, I did a real quick calculation. I think you're going to have somewhere between 700 and 1,000 votes that you will make. Some of those, obviously, people are more passionate than others, and I just, I try to communicate, and I think we all do, what representative democracy is about, and that this is the elected body that represents the city of Evanston. I think on whole, this body does a good job modeling what respectful and civil discourse is. I've been really impressed with the council and the conversations that we have. I do very much believe sort of in freedom of speech, and while we can, preach civil discourse and things like that, it doesn't mean that you don't get passionate and your voice doesn't raise, and maybe you say things that later on you regret that you said it. I don't certainly like, some of the comments, that are made directed towards any person up here that I think are over the line. But that is the public's right. If the public wants to get up there and do that, I don't think we should have, engaged back and forth. I think we need to be very respectful of public comment and public input to the council, and that is the public's 45 minutes. I feel strongly that we should not, engage back and forth regardless of what is said. In terms of, other additional steps that we can take here in the community, I think we have a great organization here in Evanston that cares a lot about, good government and citizen engagement, and that's the League of Women Voters. There's some members of the League of Women Voters here tonight, and they're always here. And I know they periodically take on projects, and I think looking to an organization like the League and saying, hey, could you guys look into this and do some of that research around the country and so forth, and come back and suggest to the council and to the city of Evanston that, hey, here are 3 or 4 or 5, actions that we think could be taken that would, improve, civil discourse here. Two other things, they're really small things, and I'm sure I'll be heckled for it potentially. But, sometimes I wish I had a button up there where I could put on some soft-sounding music, a little classical music for the crowd and things like that. Like, there's a reason that happens when you're at stores and things like that. And there's also a reason when you walk through high schools that they have mottos and inspiring words on the walls when you walk through schools. And I look behind us, and we've got a big blue wall. And so sometimes I have a fleeting thought that, gee, maybe there's an opportunity here. Because when you're out there in the audience and you're looking up here at the city council, and perhaps you're upset about a particular issue, seeing something that's pretty inspiring behind us about what we're all doing here, may be helpful. Again, it's a small thing, but I don't think there's some big thing that we're missing here. I think we're fortunate as a community that we have a lot of people that care about Evanston and want to have their voice heard. We just all have to recognize at the end of the day that it is a representative democracy, the city council, the legislators, and ultimately they need to make decisions on lots of issues over their 4 years.
Mm-hmm. All right, I do think we should move on to the next item because we are running very long. So I think this is an issue that we are probably going to continue to discuss and have our thoughts on, and we all have different opinions about. But I do, as I said earlier, I think it's important to keep talking about it because that's how we all, in my view, maintain the sense of that we all have a common purpose, and that the best way to achieve that purpose is by continuing to communicate with each other and maintain our ability to do that. So I'm going to move on to item number 9, which is a review of City of Chicago ordinance on lobbyist registration.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, this was a reference from Alderman Fisk. She asked that we put the Chicago ordinance on the agenda for information. Alderman Fisk, I don't know if you wish to add anything.
I will just say that this was a request from a constituent, Claire Kelly, and at her request, I included it on the Rules Committee agenda for discussion.
Okay. Are there any lights or discussion? Alderman Wilson?
Well, I think that some of the comments over the past months that people have made in relation to this seem to be focused more on things like people that come up at public comment and have some kind of other non-disclosed interest in what they're speaking about. And to the point about being able to freely speak at public comment, I'm a bit uncomfortable with that. I think these lobbyist ordinances tend to be more focused on circumstances where somebody's getting paid to come to us and meet with us and have coffee with us and convince us to do something. I don't really know that they are intended as the minute or up to 3 minutes for the public comment. And the other thing I find potentially troubling is where do you draw that line? If let's say you live in a tall building and you're going to have to disclose that your view would be obstructed. You might have a number of reasons for not liking a project, but to have to sign up and disclose all of these things about yourself, it starts to get a little bit uncomfortable, I think, potentially for the speakers, and I think it would be an impediment to people being able to come to this body and speak freely. The Chicago ordinance seems to me to be a bit overkill for a community our size, and the level of we're not full-time people. We don't have staff that's meeting with people on our behalves. We just kind of are doing the amount of time that we can fit in. And I don't get lobbyists banging down my door. I mean, I get emails from come to this meeting about how to save your city money and things like that, but I ignore them. So generally, otherwise, I try to have an open door. If somebody doesn't like something, I'll try to listen to that. If somebody's supporting it, same thing. But I just feel like this is kind of overkill, and I'm also very reluctant to do anything that is going to interfere with people's comfort in actually speaking to the council at public comment.
Well, I'm just going to jump in for a second here. For the longest time, anyone who spoke at citizen comment, we would ask them their address. That was part of the standard. My name is, I live at this address. And then within the last 2 or 3 years, we discovered that we were prohibited from asking for their address. So we changed that requirement, and now it's someone gives their name for the record. So we've actually moved towards towards requiring less information what we discovered was what we were not supposed to be asking people for their address. So we actually have, Alderman Wilson, even less information required now. And it was back in the day, or as little as 5 years ago, you'd have someone come to the podium and lo and behold, they were from Highland Park or Elmhurst, and they were here speaking on an issue. So, sometimes that was useful, but now we can't, that's not something we can ask, so.
It's primarily about you all, about city staff and city council. That's primarily what such an ordinance would be targeting. This is one piece of it, public comment. But
Well, Claire, could you come to the podium? Because
I'm a little bit concerned. I feel like you're missing the main point of an ordinance. The main point of it is about all of you and city staff. That's primarily what a lobby ordinance targets. And then encompassed in that is also people who might get up and they should divulge whether or not they're being paid. But it's primarily about the aldermen and city staff. This is primarily what an ordinance focuses on conflicts of interest with elected people as well as city staff. So that's one small component, public comment, but I think we shouldn't be focusing primarily on public comment.
all right, thank you. Let's see. I have a lot of lights. Fleming, then Alderman Suffredin, and then Alderman Fisk. Alderman Fleming.
So if I look at the Chicago, so I don't support this, but if I look at the Chicago ordinance, it says, if we're using this as an example, under the city law, a lobbyist is anybody, whatever their title, who attempts to influence city decisions on behalf of another. It says like a client or employer regarding administrative or legislative issues. So this one in particular, this definition does not talk about someone being paid. But if we use this definition, then I'm not really meeting with anybody. So when the Evanston Lighthouse and Gardens people call me about meeting, I'm saying no, because they're lobbying me to make a decision, right? But they're not being paid, but they have an interest in a project and so on and so forth. I am probably one of the only alder people who do not meet with any developer, including Lighthouse and Gardens, which is my own personal preference. But if I did meet with someone who was, petitioning me or trying to gain favor to make a decision, I think that I should be able to do that because we just talked about public comment being limited, and I'm not going to have a discussion with them there. And I don't care whether or I should say I don't care. I don't think it matters for me whether they are registered or not, because the next step would then be if I'm meeting with, Mr. Carlos is meeting with me about whatever his issue is, and he registers, then I guess the next step is I'm reporting that meeting to our clerk or someone else, right? There's a lot of processes here. Then I imagine then there's a FOIA part of this that then someone can go and see whoever I met with. And Mr. Sutton might be meeting with me about an issue with whatever it is, right? Maybe he doesn't feel comfortable going to someone else. He's talking to me, and that's not something that needs to be FOIA'd if he is not, I would say, in my opinion, soliciting money or giving me money or something like that, which is a whole other ethical issue, whether we have an ordinance or not. In particular, I just want to mention something, too, that was mentioned at the podium tonight. I know this came up during one of the developments about, someone being paid and working for the developer and they were lobbying and so on and so forth. But I also remember, or it came to my attention that someone came to the podium, made a presentation with a PowerPoint, that we all listened to. And it came to my attention afterwards that they were paid. Now, they didn't proclaim up here at the podium that they were paid by any group and that their, time had been paid for to sway us either way. And I think we made our decision just based on the information we had, whether or not they were paid. Of course, like I said, I didn't know that, so it didn't affect my vote. But I guess my bottom line is that this seems a little more cumbersome than I think that we need. If you have an issue with trust of your elected official or any of our elected officials, we do have an ethics board you can go to. There are some procedures already in place for that. I don't know that we need to start documenting every meeting we have with, these quote unquote lobbyists for our clerk or whoever else to then keep record of. I mean, that would be like me documenting every email I have about someone who's, sending me a petition or whatever they're sending me, trying to get me to vote yes or no to whatever their issue is. I mean, I don't want to start sending over every email either for the clerk to start recording. So it seems like a lot more work than we need. I think if there's some trust issues or you think that we're being paid off or whatever we're being, we can take that up with the ethics board.
Okay. Alderman Suffredin.
Yeah, I guess I don't understand the problem you're trying to solve. If you could help me understand it, then we could go from there. But I don't understand. Because the Lobbyist Registration Act, none of us would be registering. It'd be the people speaking with us. I mean, if you look at the City of Chicago, State of Illinois, Cook County, none of us would be required to report interactions.
Wait. I'm sorry, Claire, we can't hear you when you're out in the audience.
Yeah, I mean, you're regulating the First Amendment rights of not us, people out there, and I don't understand. No, that's exactly what it is. So what is the problem that you want to solve, and then we can work backwards from there.
All right.
Oh, that's
Clerk
awful
Reed,
kind of you, Claire.
Did you want? Okay. Did you want to? Are you?
Yeah,
yes.
I just want to say the clerk's office has done a bit of research into this. So it's not to limit conversations. If Carlos wanted to meet with Alderman Fleming or any of you about any topic, Carlos is a member of our community and has the right to do that. Wouldn't, under my interpretation of what I think we should pass as a lobbyist ordinance, Carlos wouldn't have to register. But for example, I know Alderman Fleming used to serve on the mental health board, and nonprofits do come to the mental health board to lobby for their nonprofit to receive funding from the mental health board. Is that inaccurate?
They make a presentation at a set time that's on an agenda that's produced 48 hours before.
And
they come during grant funding time to make their proposal after they've put in their information, online and so on and so forth. And then after that, a mental health board member is assigned to be a liaison for the agency where we monitor how they're spending the money.
Yeah, and I don't think it would hurt for us to have a very simple registration. If someone's being paid by some entity to meet with an alderman, whether in a public setting such as a committee meeting or at a lunch that we just don't know about, because if we don't have a lobbyist ordinance on record, we don't know who. If you're meeting with developers, we wouldn't know. If
How about an economist who makes a presentation at the city council?
I would agree. If someone pays an economist to make a presentation at the city council, that person should have had to register as a lobbyist to let us know that this person is being paid to make their comment. I think it makes sense. It's not something that would be a huge barrier. Someone would
the obligation for the registration is on
the person.
It's not on.
So this wouldn't add anything to your work. You wouldn't have to notify me that you had a meeting with anyone. It's up to the person who is the lobbyist to register with the city. They'd pay a small nominal fee. In Chicago, I think it's actually a larger fee, but here it could be a nominal fee, and that would. If we have it on the books, then we know what's going on. The public knows what's going on. We know if there are lobbyists in the city or if there aren't, and it just builds trust. Whether there are two people that register as lobbyists or one person or no one that registers, we at least have an understanding and a metric for how many people are being paid to influence decisions in our city.
Alderman Fisk, thank you.
Thank you.
I forgot what I was going to say.
Okay. Alderman Wilson.
Okay. So all day long, I think you should do this. I don't think you should do that. Karen Demhurst is out. I saw this conversation was going on. So she's going to have to register, and every time she talks to any of us about anything, she's going to have to fill out a report because that's what this says. Yeah. I had coffee with somebody from the YWCA today. So that person would have to register. Every single, passing conversation where any city business comes up would have to get reported.
No, the conversation wouldn't be reported, but if there is, let's say the YMCA has a staff member who serves as a liaison to the council and has discussions about...
It's not what this says. This, you can't...
Well, I was
it's not a liaison.
I wasn't involved in presenting this, but...
Okay,
we can craft
you're
our own
pitching it now,
ordinance.
so... Okay, so I think this is honestly kind of ridiculous for a town our size. I see things on social media. I know people are accusing us of making secret deals and getting, payoffs for things, which is absurd. That is absurd.
And I think by having...
I know I'm not talking about you or to you.
Yeah, no, I know.
You just happen to be like...
No, and I understand. But I think by having this metric, it will show that it's absurd. If it is absurd, we'll at least have something on the books that requires someone to register. If it ain't happening, it ain't happening. We'll show that it's not happening.
So that doesn't make any sense, because if a developer is going to come in with an envelope of $1,000 and slip it to somebody, they're not going to report that. So that's why it's absurd. So it's not happening. And I just think that part of that, conversation in the community is, kind of, I don't know where it comes from. I've never seen any evidence of anything like that. So, but on the other hand, to suggest that, everybody in this community, this is going to apply to every single nonprofit, to all their employees who might possibly talk to us, because the ordinance says, and most ordinances like this say things like, this section extends to any person who undertakes to influence any legislative or administrative action as part of their duties as an employee of another. So that's all the employees of people who in any way interact with us.
As part of their duties. So if they're just off work and they happen to be having a flip conversation with you, then they wouldn't have to register as lobbyists. But if they're doing it as a part of their official duties for whatever nonprofit, then yes, they'd have to register.
I mean,
so
everybody would quit their jobs. I mean, if every executive director of nonprofits had to report every single conversation with the city
It's not
staff
reporting every conversation. It's just you say, for this year, I plan to have interactions with the council members. I don't believe you have to report every single...
But then actually, Clerk Reed, you're not getting an accurate picture. I mean, I go to Starbucks on Dempster every day. And I have, on any given week, I have 15 conversations with people about city business. Some of them are people who I know who work for not-for-profits, who happen to live nearby or just walked in. I have conversations with residents there all the time. I have conversations with the Starbucks manager about issues relating to that Starbucks store. So, these things happen very organically, and I don't know. We would all have to just start wearing a muzzle.
No, I do think that this is a very intelligent council, and we can craft ordinances to say, well, if you're paid over $100 or if you're paid whatever, some amount to specifically lobby, we can put in metrics in the ordinance to make sure that everyday conversations don't have to be reported.
But everyday conversations immediately are so frequently, I mean, a lot of times they're not about the not-for-profit, but many, many, many times they are. And they happen because, oh, Melissa, here you are. I wanted to talk with you about such and such. We were discussing at our board meeting last night, getting an interaction going, or these are the new issues, or I'll ask them, what's new at particular not-for-profit? Tell me what's going on. That's frequently how things happen. Yes, we all set up individual meetings with people who have concerns about the council or our business, but an awful lot of it, because we are a relatively small city, happens in businesses or on sidewalks or very organically, as we make our way through the day. So I think I understand why Chicago and larger cities have this, but I agree with Alderman Suffredin. I'm not sure I understand what the problem is here. But I do want to, we have several other folks, so thank you very much. Mayor Haggerty?
I just had a point of order, I guess, question. Did this conversation require a motion and a second to have the conversation? It doesn't?
No,
I'm new to this whole Rules Committee stuff.
The Rules Committee is, Wally, I'm not sure, or Mario. I think,
You know, the past practice of the committee has been when there are often discussion items before the committee, and they've not required a motion or a second. There's no recommended action before the council or for the committee this evening. So certainly that can change over time at the desire of the committee, but past practice has been
Right.
Discussions like this occur.
right, it's a more informal setting than a council meeting or one of our standing committee meetings. Okay, I think, Alderman Fleming, I have you on the list?
Yeah, I'm ready to move on. No, thank you.
Okay, all right.
Just one comment since I brought up. So it's very, very.
Claire, until you're at the microphone, we can't hear you.
Okay, it's just really disconcerting to hear this incredible resistance to a lobby ordinance. Across the nation, towns much smaller than this have lobby ordinances. So I would like to propose, I will find an expert in the lobby ordinance, whether it be a representative from another city. I'd like somebody to come and to speak to you all so you can really understand it and hear about how it's implemented in cities that are this
Are you going
size.
to pay that person?
Perhaps, and
Okay.
I'll declare it.
Okay, this time
Whether
you
it's
will.
Yeah, it was
Unlike last time.
$300.
For your
I paid
economist,
Tim Allison.
you paid $300 for an economist.
And I'm the only one that's acknowledged it.
Hold on,
How about an
everybody.
applause for me? I'm the only one that's, yeah.
No, hold on, I just, one at a time. Just-
Civility.
Right, so, all right.
Decorum and order. What are you doing at the microphone?
Do you want me to sit down?
Speak your mind. Go for it, Claire. It's fun.
Can I just, no, well,
Wait, slow down, everybody. I invited Claire to come up and provide a little bit of, she is following at my direction, Alderman Sufferton. So, Claire, if you can provide us with additional information, that would be helpful.
Okay.
Okay, all right, thank you. I think we're ready to move on.
I just wanted to ask Claire just one question. Sorry, Claire.
Ms. Kelly, would you come back,
Could you come
please?
come on back up? I always try to be polite, Ms. Kelly.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm elected. I am elected, but
Right.
thank you.
Okay.
Who wanted
All
to
right.
ask?
It was
Mayor Haggerty would like to ask you a question.
Can you give some specific examples of situations that have gone on that you think requires this type of ordinance?
No. I can't right now. I mean, but
Okay.
if you'd like me to, I'll try and prepare some. I did just come off of a last day of high school, and
I understand.
But I'd be happy to, try and make a
I mean, I
list.
think that's what a lot of people up here, I mean, that's what I'm struggling with is, again, this is, to me, seems like a solution in search of a problem.
I think, Claire, if you could, when you provide us with the additional information, if you could provide us with some examples, that would be helpful
Okay,
as well.
as a contact, I would love to have somebody come up here and speak to you who is, just deeply versed in this. And from towns, like I say, of our size or smaller, who have lobby ordinances. I mean, across the nation, there are lobby ordinances, so.
If you could at least start us off with some examples of what you're describing.
Well, I think I started by saying that, in this town where we've seen a lot of large projects going through in the face of just, it's created there's a lot of distrust out there. And like I said, perceived or real, I'm not saying, but either way, the idea is to restore trust in this town. And this is one, this is a way that's very effective in doing so. And it's also just, you should do this for transparency. And it doesn't, as Devon said, if there's nobody lobbying, then there's no work to be done. There's no forms to fill out. And the point is that, like whoever pointed out, if you're giving them $1,000 under the table, well, it ups the ante. Because if you do that, and there's a lobby law, now you're subject to higher fines. And it makes it less, less, accessible to do something like that.
Okay, all right, thank you. I think we should move forward. All right, we're going to move on to item number 10, notarization of financial disclosure forms.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, there's a staff report before you. I think that if this is something that you have any interest in, that perhaps we would then, if you could just refer it back to staff, we can come back with some ordinance amendments. The city clerk, I think, made some additional comments, which we could certainly incorporate. So again, I think if this is something you'd like to pursue, then perhaps just refer it back to staff.
Alderman Wilson.
I would like to do that. In addition, if we could have the clerk work with the law department to review the existing form that's used, just to make sure that the language is current. I know that some of the language is for example, it refers to your significant other as opposed to, maybe the way we refer to our relationships in the present day. So if the law department could just take a look at that form and present the proposed form when that's before us, we can make sure that that's vetted
Okay.
and appropriate.
All right. So staff has direction with that?
Sure.
Okay. All right. We're going to move on to, we're going to review rules regarding the votes during City Council Standing Committee meetings.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, on page 27 of your packet, a memorandum from Mr. Trito. We're proposing Resolution 37R18 to clarify the votes that occur at committee. Matters that obtain a majority vote from all present would move forward with positive recommendations. Matters that obtain a tie vote from all present will move forward to the full City Council with a neutral recommendation, and then clarifies any matter, not just ordinances or resolutions, before a City Council Standing Committee may move forward to the City Council with a neutral recommendation.
I'm confused. I'm sorry. So if a matter fails at committee,
Then it would not move forward.
okay. All right. If a matter fails at the committee, then it does not move forward. Okay. So that does not change this.
That's correct.
Right, this does not change that.
I think the challenge is that from time to time committees decide that despite the fact that it has failed, that they have still moved it forward. And so, again, the purpose, I think, of this referral to the committee was to clarify if something is defeated at committee or if something has a tie, what occurs.
Okay. So may I have a motion regarding this?
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, so that moves forward. So item number 12. This is referendum for November ballot, change city clerk to appointed position.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, this was a reference by Alderman Rainey. There is a staff report from Ms. Mason Cup that outlines the procedure. Happy to answer any questions.
Alderman Rainey?
I'm sure several of you must have been contacted by the League of Women Voters over the last, 6 months or so. At least I know I was. Wonderful conversation regarding the pros and cons of elected versus appointed clerk, and a review of various communities around the state of Illinois that had both gone from elected clerk to appointed clerk, and some who always had an appointed clerk, and vice versa. And I found it really fascinating because I had never really given it too much thought. And lately, given the discussion of budget, et cetera, and the various obligations of the clerk and the various issues with, well, I can't do this anymore, I'm not doing that anymore. I just thought if the clerk were appointed, then the people in the clerk's office could be sharing responsibilities with the city manager's office, with the finance office, with the collector's office, et cetera. And that would be very financially efficient. Absolutely, positively, this doesn't have to do with the current clerk. It has to do with Devon Reed. It doesn't have to do with that. It has to do with the office. And however, certain issues that have arisen make it, to me, make it seem like this might be the time to bring this to the people. You want to talk about being democratic? This is an extremely democratic thing. Referendum are democratic. You're asking the people of the city of Evanston what they want. They've never been asked this before. And I think it's really quite a bit of democracy in action. Do you want an elected clerk or do you want an appointed clerk? And it's quite that simple. You want to talk about power and democracy? There's probably not a more powerful, more concentrated power in the city of Evanston than in the city clerk. Nobody can tell the city clerk what to do. I mean, the city clerk can do whatever he wants. He's not like a city manager. He's not like an alderman. It's all concentrated right there. And it's never been more obvious than with this city clerk. So I'm just asking the Rules Committee to give this some thought. I mean, I've heard this discussion a lot in the community, and I've heard, people on both sides. But I think it would be a really good time to put it on a ballot and let people decide.
All right,
And
Alderman
therefore, I
Wilson.
move that we do this.
I'm sorry, Ann, I interrupted you.
Okay, I'm finished.
But, okay. Alderman Wilson.
Thank you. Generally speaking, as far as the record-keeping aspect of things, I don't think record-keeping should be a political issue. So you might like your present clerk, and they might be doing the job exactly the way you prefer. On the other hand, you might have a city clerk who shows up, and this is not you, just to be clear, but let's say there was a city clerk who decided, you know what, I'm going to destroy all the records before, 5 years ago. And they do that. Or I'm going to delete a lot of stuff from the website, or I'm going to do whatever it might be. There is really no ability to control a large portion of that aspect of the job. So this is with regard to the record keeping. I understand and respect the clerk has been working to expand the role and to do different things with that job. But as far as the record keeping part, I'm uncomfortable with the idea that record keeping would be a political position. Generally speaking, though, I don't feel like this that this issue is a big community priority. So I don't think we should be putting this up as a referendum. We've got a lot of things that we should be attending to. If the work is getting done, the work's getting done, and I think if we want to work with the position later and work with the clerk later, that's something we can take on a more measured basis. But I don't feel comfortable pursuing this as a referendum.
Any other discussion?
Alderman Fisk had
Alderman Fisk, go ahead, 1 second, please. Clerk Reed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was under the impression that the League was doing a study of the clerk's office and that of the duties of the clerk's office. Do we have any idea, Sue, when that might be forthcoming? And again, this is not about the current city clerk. This is about the function of the clerk's office.
This is very unusual because I'm supposed to be just an observer to this meeting.
Can you state your name for the record, please?
Yes, it's
Right.
Suzanne Calder. The League initiated some research, not a study, because a study is a particular thing that, in League terminology, we did determined to do some research because we didn't know what a clerk should be doing. And so it was for us to get background on what the role of a clerk was. And we have done our research, as Alderman Rainey said. We've interviewed probably about 12 or so other communities, some with appointed clerks, some with elected officials, some who have had referendums, and in changing or not changing that the referendum got defeated. We continually stressed that it was about a clerk and not Mr. Reed. But we did research state statutes, Evanston ordinances, and we have made a small report to the League at our annual meeting. We are planning to make a more formal report and make it public, but that will be some time coming. But we wanted to be, if a referendum came up, we wanted to be able to educate the community about the role of a city clerk. and that was it. We will not have a position on whether it should be elected or appointed.
Thank you, Sue, and that's certainly what we would expect from the league. Not a recommendation, but information. And I think that's actually really helpful. I find it really interesting to think about this as compared to the township. And I'm curious as to whether there would be any cost savings, Mr. City Manager. I don't expect you to answer this tonight, but I just, as we, and you know how long it took us to have the discussion about the township, I'm just curious about that because it does seem to me if we're streamlining and can cut or make cost savings, that would be a piece of information that would go along, I think, well with whatever the league comes up with. But I think that's all of that information is going to be really helpful, I think.
Okay. I see no more lights. Wait, excuse me, Mayor Haggerty, you did have your light on, yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to confirm, Sue, because I know the league sent a couple of folks over. I met with them. They just talked to me that they were doing this. I didn't know anything about it before then. My understanding is this research that the league has been doing started a while ago, before the last election. I just want to confirm and understand the start date of it.
I can't answer that question. Thank you.
Oh.
I just don't know. It's been going on for at least a year and a half, if not 2 years. But I don't know when we actually started it.
Okay. All right.
I mean,
okay. My understanding was it was before. That was important. That's important. That was important to me. I also think that, if this is a debate that the council ultimately takes up, I would hope that if there were ever a referendum placed on the ballot, that it's clearly understood that the elected clerk in that position, serves out the term if the voters in a referendum said, no, we want to have an appointed clerk and not an elected clerk. I would assume that's the way it works. Okay, thank you.
Alderman Rainey?
Yeah, I'd like to get the information regarding budgeting from the city manager, and let's hold this for the next Rules Committee meeting. Could we do that?
Yes. Okay. All right. So this issue is now held until the next.
Would be July.
No, next August.
Because a referendum, the limit is August 20th. So if we were to decide to do it, it would have to be.
So it would be the next Rules Committee meeting, which is the first Monday in August.
Okay.
Madam Chair, could I also ask staff to give us information just on the history of city clerks? How many communities in Illinois have elected or appointed? I just know nothing about it.
Can we limit it to Illinois?
That's what I said. Illinois.
Okay, I'm sorry. Mayor Haggerty?
I mean, I would just like to suggest along those lines, Alderman Fisk, that perhaps we just wait for the League of Women Voters report that they're going to issue. Or are you worried, Alderman?
I've already asked that this be on the next Rules Committee. I mean, we can get that information from the league, and also you can just plug it in and get it from Google. But this information,
All right. So at this point, this issue is held until.
Yes.
Clerk Reed, did you want to say one last thing?
Yeah, I just want to make one point. When compiling data about the office, I'd love to, as it is an independent office, I think our office should compile any data that you're looking for, and we can do that. Whether it's budgeting, we can compile all of that data. And just to answer Alderman Wilson's point about records keeping shouldn't be political, there are very clear laws the state of Illinois has on record retention, and so there isn't room for political anything with those laws for retention. So,
Okay, thank you.
thank you.
All right. So this matter is held until the next Rules Committee meeting. The next item is item 13, outdoor cafe regulations. Staff and ward alderman approval only. I think it's self-explanatory.
I move approval.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All right, any opposed?
Could I just say one thing about it? Really, the information we get on these, I mean, it is just so overwhelming. We get, and the restaurant wants 1 table and 2 chairs. I mean, and we get like 5 pages. Is that really necessary? That's also what
I will say, Alderman Rainey, you and I were both on the council when this first started, and one of the key issues, I'm just saying, was the amount of litter that we had in the downtown. And so that's why we had those rules.
To deal with it, not
Right.
Administration Public Works.
Okay, I think by having however many pages, it is to emphasize that litter will not be tolerated.
All right.
Okay, all right, we're moving on. Discussion of Amazon purchases.
Oh, that's mine too.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, this was a referral from Alderman Rainey.
I just want to make it very clear. We do it differently every Administration Public Works meeting. Amazon purchases need to be taken off the consent agenda and just added to the committee chair's report when she reads the items off the consent agenda. Not to take 2 roll call votes in a row. I mean, it's just such a waste of time.
And Alderman Rainey, members of the committee.
Hold on. Okay, go ahead.
The reason.
Well, you go ahead. I'm sorry.
Again, when Alderman Sufferton was elected to the council, he declared the conflict, and this was the device that the Corporation Council devised to make sure that that conflict was addressed. I don't know that if it's been causing an issue. I certainly haven't noticed it. If other members of the council feel this way, I'm certainly glad for us to look at other ways. It seems pretty streamlined at this point.
Did someone put their light on? I'm sorry that I missed. Okay. All right.
That's why our meetings are so long.
Well, so let me ask a question as the chair. So the way that we're doing it now, and granted, I've only been the chair for a little while and I've made some mistakes, but I'm just, so great. The way we do it now is we do everything and then we call the roll, then we do Amazon, then Tom or Alderman Sufferton abstains. So we do it twice, but it doesn't take that long. So that this is the way that the legal department has advised us. Is that correct?
Yes, and with the previous action this evening, adding a consent calendar now, all Alderman Sufferton will need to do in the future is abstain from that item on the consent calendar. So you will be combining, it's a separate item, you will take it as one vote. As long as he abstains on the consent calendar of Administration of Public Works for that item, it should even be easier now with the use of a consent calendar.
All right, great.
All right, I think we've got that cleared up. I'm not going to permit any other new business, and I'd like a motion for adjournment.
Move adjournment.
Second.
All right, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you very much, everyone.